Hi, and welcome to the Unreal Engine News and Community Spotlight. So first off, Epic is going to be hosting a VFX Masterclass in Los Angeles. This is going to be taking place with Nomon, and it happens on January 20th. It's going to be going on all day. I believe the classes themselves, if you can attend in person, start at 11 a.m. Pacific time, but if you can't or are unable to attend in person or are not in LA, they'll be live streaming the event starting at noon Pacific. So definitely check that out. There's going to be a lot of really great talks surrounding the workflow of VFX going on there. This last week, we've announced our NVIDIA Edge winners for December. There's 3 amazing projects. There's a lovely VR project called Chiaro and the Elixir of Life by Martov Co. There's a hotel room architectural visualization by The Black Fabric, and a really great game project that we're excited to see in development called Eximius by Ammobox Studios. Got some more details about those in the blog post. I do recommend going and taking a look at those. We're also really amped for the year coming up. There's a lot of really amazing projects that we're expecting in 2018 and a lot of fantastic things made in Unreal Engine. So we've compiled a list of IGN's expected games or anticipated games for 2018, GameSpot, Polygon, where all these titles that should be keeping an eye out for this year include A Way Out, Biomutant. We're real thrilled for Kingdom Hearts 3 and big titles like Soul Calibur, and even Nintendo's Yoshi should be coming out for Switch this year. But there's a lot of really awesome trailers. Go take a look at those. There's a lot going on or going to be coming up in 2018. And finally, there's a design manufacturing for real-time visual effects or visualizations taking place on January 18th. It's surrounding the workflow of Datasmith. Craig Barr is going to be hosting that. If you're excited or interested in that webinar, if you go check on the site, there's a sign up and you can find out all the information regarding that on the page. So, on to our weekly karma earners. These folks are answering questions for us. They're helping out their fellow community members and just being all around amazing rock stars. So we'd love to give a huge shout out to Zlarator, Vizjin, Every Nun, Thompson in13, Una Unagi, No Fight, Garner P57, Jin VE, Shadow River, and Centurias. You guys are amazing and crushing it live. On to our community spotlight. Our first project this week is called Hoverloop. In short, it's a split-screen arcade arena combat game. To me, this kind of feels like almost like Rocket League in its feel and abilities, but you're hovering instead of driving around cars. You have a number of customizable drones, the ability teleports, death rays, shields. You can play solo, or you're able to do together with split screen or online multiplayer. This game is currently on Kickstarter, so if you'd like to back them and help them out, they, I'm sure, would love your support. They have a really amazing trailer. I didn't share it today. They have a really hysterical trailer that you should go take a look at. Our second community spotlight item is called Procedural Earth. So it's based on geographical information system data. So they've made this real open world. It's real-time data streaming, with like very little to no loading time, and it's a procedurally generated Earth. And so it's read and used on runtime. Nothing in it is baked, and they're actually simulating like a full real-size Earth, and it's just mind-boggling what you all are able to do. I love it. He's got this demonstration here. It's a 220 kilometer square space, or 220 kilometer by 220, and you know, he can do a number of other features, unbound worlds, procedural imagery. It's got a lot of details in the forums. Definitely recommend checking it out. It's a lot of cool projects going on, so great job to Cessid in the forums. And our third community spotlight for this week is called Solar Warden. So Kaze of Kami has busted out of the AAA industry and has decided to go indie. So he's created this project. The idea here is that a Solar Warden is an ultra-secret project that maintains a fleet of spaceships that are operating primarily within Earth's orbit and around our solar system. And some say they're defending us against alien threats. But I think he's done a really great job. The game looks beautiful. There's a lot going on already, like the UI's built up, the systems. They have a community Discord if you want to join and follow along. But you're going to be commanding your fleet via real-time strategy. It's a fully narrated campaign. They're working on full co-op support for 4 players. Just looking really great. So wonderful job, and I'm looking forward to seeing the progress he makes over the course of the next year. So thank you for joining us for our news and community spotlight. Hey, and welcome to the Unreal Engine Livestream. I'm your host, Amanda Bott, and with me I have Cannon Pence, our General Counsel of Epic. So as some of you may be aware, there's been a lot of discussion around the marketplace. We've decided to do an audit of the marketplace regarding potential assets that may be infringing on copyright and trademark. And so Cannon has kindly decided to join us and sort of talk about what protections or what laws you need to be mindful of and how you can protect yourself as a buyer, a seller, or a developer. So yeah, thank you for coming.
Sure, yeah, no problem. This is my second Unreal Engine live stream, which might start a tradition of an annual least exciting Unreal Engine live stream.
Well, you just have to make it exciting, right? Just do little copyright dances.
Yes, make patents, copyrights, and trademarks exciting. That's a new ask. You didn't ask that one when you asked me to come on.
Apologies.
Okay, hi. Yeah, I'm General Counsel for Epic. I've been with Epic for about 5 or 6 years in-house, and I worked with Epic for another 5 years as outside counsel. So I've been with the company a long time, and I've been working in and with the games industry for about 10 years. So we're here to talk about, as Amanda said, what specifically prompted it was questions around marketplace assets, but then a lot of the questions came in talking more generally about copyrights and trademarks in our licensees' games. I got to start with a caveat, which is I'm Epic's lawyer, which means I can't be your lawyer, which means I can't give you legal advice. So this isn't legal advice to you. I'm just speaking generally about legal concepts. Also, I'll add, and I've seen throughout a lot of the questions, that people are looking for, what's the rule about this thing? What, a clear-cut answer. Unfortunately, those of you who are somewhat familiar with matters of the law, there rarely are clear-cut answers. So before we dove in, I wanted to start things off with a note of disappointment.
So it's all hoping.
Yeah. So IP generally, there's more nuance than this for sure, and there's other there's categories of IP that I won't talk about here, but the big three are patent, trademark, and copyright. Patent we won't really talk about here. It doesn't come up in the games industry too often, but a patent, generally speaking, is a original invention. So typically you see those in, mechanical or electrical engineering or pharmaceuticals. They've been doing software patents for a while, but the pendulum kind of swings back and forth as to whether those are enforceable and in vogue. Trademark is about a distinctive mark, and that can be a word mark, an image, or a combination that identifies the source of a good. So the idea behind it is you see, the Epic Games logo on a game box, and you say, that's probably a really good game because it comes from Epic. Or if you see the Unreal Engine Circle U logo at the startup of a game, you think game's probably going to look pretty good. Um, so when if you put the Unreal Engine Circle U logo at the start of a game that wasn't Unreal Engine, and that game looked awful, then that would kind of speak poorly to the reputation of Unreal Engine, which makes Epic unhappy and makes me take action specifically. So that's the idea behind Trademark. It's people that they want to protect the value of their brand, and they do that through the unique words or images of their logo. Finally is copyright. Copyright is the expression of an idea. That can be in multiple forms, poetry, literature, art, music, dance. It's pretty broad and it expands. So the ideas themselves can't be copyrighted. It has to be a unique expression of that idea. So when we talk about video games, sometimes people talk about like a copyright behind a game mode or game concepts, and those can't be copyrightable. So you can't say like we have a copyright on the idea of a game with space marines and aliens. But the way that you do that game can certainly have valid copyrights, both in the art and the source code, and in some cases the like a layout or mechanics. So that's an overview. When I talked about gray area before, this is what I mean more specifically. It's so a IP infringement question is only really resolved, at least in the United States, when it's gotten a finding of fact from the finder of fact in court. So that's typically a jury. So the parties present their cases, and it goes to the jury, and the jury makes a decision: is it infringement or not? Until that happens, you've just got two different parties with opinions about whether a thing is infringing. Often, this gets a little oversimplified in the media, where somebody sends a demand letter. So recently, Humvee, or whatever the company is that runs Humvee, sent a complaint to, I think it was Activision, and there's a court case ongoing now. So let's say they had sent a demand, and Activision said, "Fine, we're going to take out Humvees from the game." You might see articles that say, Humvee is copyrightable or trademarked, and you can't use it in any video games. Well, that hasn't actually, at that point, hadn't been concluded. All you know is whoever runs Humvee doesn't want you to do it, and they're willing to take legal action about it. That case is actually new and ongoing, so the result is unknown. But game companies, litigation is expensive. Game companies need to be practical. Activision would certainly have a lot more resources than an indie, and they have a lot more invested in the Call of Duty franchise, and so they're presumably pretty disinclined to make a major change to it. But nobody wants to go to a really expensive litigation. So even if a thing isn't actually infringing, and you would ultimately win in court, which is hard to know for sure, you might still want to avoid doing it because you don't want the trouble of having to get that final answer.
Yeah.
And this takes me to the Unreal Engine marketplace, where things get a bit more complicated. So I have to make these decisions for Epic's games. What level of risk is acceptable to Epic when we put assets into the games? The Unreal Engine marketplace is different because this is a resource for all of our licensees, and we license the assets under our EULA, and we say you can use this stuff. in your games or other content they use with Unreal Engine. So let's say somebody submits an asset and it's a Rubbermaid wastebasket. That's what the asset's called. It duplicates a real thing, and they submit it to the marketplace. So we could put it on the marketplace and call it, Rubbermaid wastebasket, and we could sell it, and people could use it in their games, and probably they would use it to fill out an office or a bedroom or something, and nobody would care. Rubbermaid presumably isn't going to be upset if they found out. Probably they wouldn't find out. But it would be allowable under the Unreal Engine EULA to make a game where the purpose of the game is to take a Rubbermaid wastebasket and bludgeon children with it. So if you had a game called Rubber Basket Baby Basher, this would presumably be controversial, right?
Right.
And now suddenly you've taken this innocuous thing that's non-controversial and you've thrust it into a controversial light.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, and at that point, Rubbermaid would presumably say, oh, we don't like this at all.
Right, yeah.
And
Don't want to be part of
you,
that.
developer, have no right to include our products in your game. And you, Epic, have no right to sell that content to the developers on your marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And Epic doesn't control, we don't censor our licensees' games, so I can't tell you not to make that game. We can tell you you can't make an unlawful game, but I'm not sure that that game would be unlawful. So that means we have to think about edge cases when we look at the marketplace content. We have to think about, is this something that the rights IP holder is going to be upset about? Is this like, the company's gone, so we're talking about a thing that was a product in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And then we think maybe the IP holder is really litigious and we're okay with something that's inspired by their product, but for them it needs to be a lot more different than, say, a Boeing product that's sold for just to the U.S. Army. That's not a consumer product.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're not going to call it a Boeing helicopter
Right.
on our marketplace, but I'm okay with a closer product.
Yeah, closer representation
Right.
of it.
So I recognize that developers who are creating the content are putting a lot of time into it, and they love like a clear set of rules. But that's very difficult and maybe ultimately impossible to give. We can talk about the nuances on this program, but it varies on a case-by-case basis about what level of risk Epic is okay accepting both for itself, and it tries to look after its licensees who are presumably in a position of trusting the content on the marketplace is fine for them to use. We don't want to sell our licensees content that could get them into hot water.
Right.
So, overview done.
All right. Well, thank you for that overview. So, sort of what we wanted you to come in and kind of talk about generally what copyright and trademark are. And prior to the stream, we sort of did a call for questions, and we had a number of you, thank you so much, contribute to the forum post asking questions. And so we're going to go through some more specific examples, and then feel free to toss more questions into chat, and we'll hopefully get to those as well. But we're going to start with the ones that we curated from the forum post, and then we'll go through. So,
how do we do it?
I have a list of questions, and
Okay.
I will ask them to you.
Can you do them in the voice with the voice of what the person who submitted it you think would sound like?
Yeah. Well, I don't have their name, so
Okay.
I pulled that from it. So one of our first questions was, say they would like to create a scene for a game based on real life places, such as the White House and its surrounding buildings, or the Eiffel Tower. typical, popular tourist attractions, things like that. How is that protected in any way?
Um, it varies.
It varies.
Yeah.
I feel like that's going to be the answer to
Yes,
most of these
that's right.
things, but
Right. The answer, the overarching answer is can't tell you. No. So nobody owns Washington D.C.
right.
I mean, I guess maybe the U.S. government at some level, but nobody owns San Francisco.
Hmm.
Um, so I happen to actually know who did the work for the attorney who did the clearances for developing San Francisco or the Bay Area in Watch Dogs 2.
Oh. Hmm.
Um, and I don't know if those of you who've played the game, it has San Francisco, it's got the Silicon Valley, it's got Oakland. It's a pretty big game, and obviously they want to represent iconic, recognizable parts of San Francisco, like the Presidio, and they want to make Silicon Valley accurate feeling. Um, on the other hand, uh, they opted. I mean, so in practice, they opted against putting Apple and Google and
Hmm.
Intel there. They have companies that are clearly Apple, Google, and Oracle or whatever, but they don't call them that. They come up with new names. Um, I think they didn't put the Transamerica building, which is that like kind of pinnacle looking San Francisco building.
Hmm.
Um, but there are plenty of things that are in San Francisco that are accurate. It's similar in GTA, like the 4 was New York and 5 was LA. I don't know LA as well, but in New York, like they had Central Park and they had the Link. What is that theater on the Upper West Side?
Uh,
Lincoln or something. Anyway, it doesn't
yeah.
matter. But um, generally, they keep things like they don't have a thing called the Empire State Building. They have a thing called um, Liberty City.
Hmm.
So I don't know, whatever. So things that are not owned, the things that I would be concerned about if we were making a game that was based on like a London game,
Hmm.
um, would be brands of companies um, and the stickiest point would be particularly um, iconic but recent pieces of architecture. So like the Gherkin building in London
Hmm.
is now like a major recognizable landmark in London, but I don't know how the owners of that architecture, the developers, feel about use of their um, building in a game, and it may depend on the game and how that building is used. So, like, what if it was the site? You remember that like Call of Duty where they had the Russian terrorist thing in the
Oh, yeah.
airport?
Hmm.
So, what if you had something that was controversial like that in that building? So then it raises the public profile, and they get worried about it.
Right.
Uh, in another game, some military game like a shooter, and it was based on it, I don't remember the details, but the Manchester Cathedral or the Catholic Church maybe
Hmm.
took issue with that there was like a battle scene or some sort of action taking place in their cathedral. Now, the extent to which they could have a viable legal claim, I'm skeptical of, but nevertheless, it was a thing that caused some trouble and controversy that
Okay.
somebody had to deal with. Um, so unfortunately, it can be problematic to recreate um, in every detail
Right.
real life places. Generally, I think it's fine to do real life places. So obviously, like you can write a book that's based in Berlin,
Hmm.
and you can talk about going on this street and whatever. And you can talk about the Holocaust memorial, and maybe characters meet there. But I would be worried about putting like a suicide scene in a real coffee shop, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
All right. And they also on the flip side. So those are more modern day cities, but they are also talking about, the Great Wall of China, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat. These are all much
Yeah.
older, more
I wouldn't have
historical.
any concerns about that at all.
Okay.
Anything old, I wouldn't worry about.
Is there sort of where's the rough bleed there? Like
Yeah.
obviously these things are old and these things are new, but where would you guess that like?
Well, the IPs for structures generally be on the copyright side. They can be on the trademark side for like kind of like the the way the gherkin looks could
Mhm.
be a mark. Um, but on the copyright side in the U.S., 1923 is the kind of safe spot, or 1922 and earlier is a
Okay.
safe spot because if it's in the public domain if it was before 1923. If it was after 1923, it can get more complicated because if it was renewed between 1923 and 78, I think, then it could have a full life of 95 years.
I see.
So
Okay.
then you have to research.
Yeah.
But for old stuff, I wouldn't worry about. You mentioned Great Wall of China. If you were making a game that was directed towards the the Chinese market,
Uh-huh.
Chinese games have to get approval through the Chinese
The
rating
government,
authority, whatever it
right?
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so they're sensitive to Chinese cultural things. I don't think so. It might depend on how that's portrayed,
Hmm.
but I wouldn't worry about it from an IP standpoint.
Okay. Um, let's see. They don't know. Do you have any suggestions as far as, and this covers a broad array of items, but they're talking about lookalike projects. So you talk about cars, or we'll get into weapons and guns a little bit. And again, I assume this is very much, it varies depending on the owner of the IP, but their example was a game world may need a supercar or a pistol, and they would like to borrow, obviously, from real world design examples and styles of those things. Um, and they do reference the Glock that was mentioned before.
Yeah.
Um,
So I can comment on that generally. The let's look at cars specifically for now. For a game like Gran Turismo or Forza, it's really like their whole pitch is this is hyper realistic supercar racing. That's the whole game, and it's important to them that everything be right. And Polyphonic Digital and I don't know whoever Microsoft whoever does Forza, they probably have full-time teams who are responsible for licensing um, cars from each of the manufacturers. Um, they do that because they want to make sure that they have the rights to put Porsche cars or McLaren or whatever in the game. Now, let's say they didn't do that. Um, I would guess McLaren wouldn't do anything about it because of that who that company is. What about Ferrari? Well, they're pretty protective. I don't mean to say McLaren's not protective, but
mhm.
um, different companies will react differently based on how kind of like what level of litigious culture they have. But also, there's money in licensing cars for a game, so there may be a profit motivation as well. So if you know, like, this is how much it costs to put a Porsche in uh, the Gran Turismo game, then they want that money for the next game, right? Presumably.
Right.
Um, Grand Theft Auto also has supercars and cars of all ranges, but the game's not really about cars.
No.
Um, they're expensive enough to make because they got to license all that music. Um, they've decided that they don't need to have a Lamborghini or a Bugatti. They just have cars that are clearly inspired by particular Lamborghinis or Bugatti. And that serves the purpose of the game just fine. You get to feel like you're driving a Bugatti, but it just isn't called Bugatti.
Mhm.
Um, and they save themselves the money and they save themselves the risk of being sued by Bugatti. um, they approach it by saying, I presume they take the car that they want, and then they just make design changes, particularly on the logo,
Mm.
um, to make it clearly evocative, but not a replica. I think they do a great job, and I think they are an excellent example of how to do it right. And to my knowledge, they've been totally successful, and they have not been sued. I mean, I guess they could have gotten letters that weren't made public. They did get sued by a strip club in LA because it's called the Playpen, and they did a thing called the Pigpen.
Oh,
So it was inspired by a real strip club,
right.
uh, but it wasn't successful. The claim wasn't successful. Um, I assume that they do the same thing with guns. Unfortunately, for this audience, I'm not a gun guy. I don't know guns very well at all. Um, but it makes sense to me that they would use the same approach for guns.
Mm.
Um, on the subject of guns, which comes up in the marketplace a lot, um, we are not, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, Epic isn't interested in using the trademarks of active gun manufacturers, and we are not interested in having replicas of um, actually commercially available firearms. Um, and the marketplace controversy, I think, um, addressed that, or it was on that point. And so often the question comes up, well, how do we change it? What's enough? So somebody like Glock is quite aggressive. Um, I don't know that they have been in the game space, but just generally, both in terms of like replicas and other gun companies or how their products are used, um, I would lean towards um, a uh,
More significant
more design
changes.
changes,
Yeah.
yeah, um, than just like taking this little like switch and moving it from here to here.
Yeah. Well, and we actually had one of our Christian Allen, our North American evangelist, kind of chimed in on this thread a little bit specifically regarding the Glock and guns in general, and said that that is very dependent on the manufacturer, and was even saying that sometimes it's not even the overall design that's covered. Well, that's protected as well, but they will often um, copyright like elements of the design. So it's not the fact that you change the overall shape, it's that you can't use the little the trigger can't be shaped exactly this way, or it can't have these nice markings on it just this way because they've actually done certain elements of the weapon in
So
addition to the whole thing.
that's right. But I think active gun companies are going to be cast a wide net for IP protection for their guns. Largely, I assume that would be to prevent gun competitors from replicating their gun and selling it for cheaper. Um, I think those IP protections could also be applicable in a games context. However, my sense is the risk is acceptably low where you don't use the name of the manufacturer and you have a gun that's evocative of a real gun but not a replica. I recognize again that it's a gray area of how do you make it evocative but not a replica?
Right.
And the answer is it varies. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those you have to like know it when you see it, and there's no hard and fast rule where it's like change 10% or make it
Right.
this much different. It's modify some things. Does it feel different enough? Which
Yeah.
unfortunately is not
Yeah. And
clear cut.
right, it's not clear cut, and ultimately Epic needs to make the call on that. And I can understand some community members' frustration with that, but I would ask that they recognize that Epic's on the line here, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
telling people they can use these marketplace assets, and also we're subject to lawsuits potentially if the IP holder takes issue with it. So we have to make a call based on our own level of comfort.
Yeah, and I think some folks were asking, like, if a buyer purchases something and a company like Glock or someone comes after them and they've purchased it from our marketplace,
Yeah.
who's at risk in that line there?
Well, in
Is it
theory,
everyone?
yeah, it could be. Yeah.
So the buyer, the seller, and
Yeah.
Epic?
Right. Um, and so when this relates to what I said before about the marketplace and when we're making like the risk, what level of risk are we comfortable with? It may be that an exact gun replica is totally fine in a game, and I think like Activision and EA for the Battlefield, Call of Duty games, and maybe others have sort of decided that they're not going to license guns anymore, and they say we're making realistic games about warfare. The whole point is to be realistic, like the Gran Turismo stuff. So we need to have real guns in here, but they've decided that the First Amendment protections for video games as a sort of protected expression will make them safe from, and they're willing to fight that battle in court. That's what it really boils down to. Like, they care about realism more than they care about the cost of litigation, and they feel that they're going to win. And ultimately, maybe somebody who had an asset on the Unreal Engine marketplace would win, but we don't know what kind of game they're making, and it may vary depending on the game. So we have to think broader than we would have to think if we were just asking this question about one particular game.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Some folks were wondering, maybe they've modified the gun to not be an exact replica of a real-life weapon, but they would like to still use some of the language in their description. As it being like, this thing is similar to, I assume that's, is that probably not a little frowned upon?
I would not like that, yeah.
Okay.
Right. If you said, here's my, whatever, blocky pistol inspired by the Glock, whatever.
Yeah.
I would not like that.
Okay. So now you know. They're wondering about, say someone has a game on Steam using assets they've bought from Unreal Marketplace. Can the creator of those assets ever ask for a proof of purchase for those things that were in that game?
Yeah, that was
weird.
An interesting question. So I don't. So somebody, I guess by the creator that means the developer who put the asset on our marketplace?
Potentially.
All right, so developer sells an asset on Unreal Engine Marketplace. Other developer buys the asset, puts it in their game, puts the game on Steam. Games on Steam includes the asset from the original artist. Artist finds the game on Steam and says, that's my art. I put it on Unreal Engine Marketplace, but I don't think they bought it from Unreal Engine Marketplace. I suppose they could bring a lawsuit that said, you don't have a right to do this.
Unlikely.
But they would lose because it went through the marketplace. And practically speaking, I don't see that ever happening.
Right.
I think for legitimate games, artists who sell their assets through our marketplace will assume that the Unreal Engine game that is using them got it from the marketplace.
Right. Let's see. There's a question around several sellers have been selling assets named and styled identically to real-world assets for some time, and someone was asking what's their course of action, whether it's modification of the assets past, and when will that happen. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting an audit of the marketplace. It's going to take some time, so it'll probably be over the course of the next few months. And we're going to be reaching out to sellers, or the marketplace team will be reaching out to sellers, being like, hey, we have concerns surrounding your asset as far as copyright infringement and IP. And we're going to give all those sellers the opportunity to modify those assets. So we're not just taking them out and like removing them from our marketplace. We want, we still want you all to be a part of that marketplace. And so it sort of depends on their time frame. We are going to give a window. We haven't narrowed down. We're targeting, say you have 30 days to modify your asset. But we also are not, that's not a hard and fast rule, only because we know that a number of you have many assets on your marketplace, so, or in your store page. And it wouldn't be fair to be like, well, suddenly you have to change 30 assets or something like that, and they all need to be done in the next 30 days. So we're going to be working with sellers on a case-by-case basis to allow them to modify so that they can continue operating within our ecosystem. It's not just going to be a takedown and be like, well, you're out. We're not going to kick you out of our marketplace. Let's see. So there's a question about whether items that have been reviewed and if they're ultimately taken down, and as far as whether they'll be automatically contacted. So we're not going to be contacting all buyers of the assets. There's just a lot, and us not providing in our marketplace doesn't necessarily mean that that content is invalid or not able to be used legally or in correct manners. So, and because we don't know the foundation under, or the your intention of how you're using that asset, it's not all going to be just an automatic like, oh, well, here, have that back. So that'll probably, again, be a case-by-case sort of
That's
thing.
right. Right. If there was some down the road legal problem, we would work with the buyer.
Let's see. So someone was wondering, what happens if they create a logo innocently or like in a void that happened to, or some established company claims is too similar to their existing logo. So if I sit here and I create my logo and then somehow I have something very similar that's already in existence, what is their claim to that?
You can't, it's not much of a protection, probably not a protection at all to say, oh, I just didn't know about it.
Yeah.
That would, because then anybody could say that and it would, right, you couldn't prove it. So practically speaking, you're just not allowed to, trademarks are registered in different jurisdictions, like different countries basically. You're just not allowed within where a trademark is registered and protected in a particular kind of use. You're not allowed to have one that is identical or confusingly similar. And confusingly similar is one of those gray areas that we talked about before. It's hard to know where that line is drawn.
All right, let's see. So someone was wondering how do they go about protecting the visuals in their game? So what's the typical process? Should and can they copyright each character design or concepts?
Yeah. So generally speaking, it's a good idea for game developers that are serious about their game to register trademarks. Certainly in their primary jurisdiction, the primary territory in which they're releasing the game, but ideally in all of them that you're releasing the game.
Mm-hmm.
The easiest ones to do are the US and Europe, because you can do a community trademark registration which covers the EU. When I say easiest, I mean those are just two that cover a lot of marketplace. So that could be the game, the name and the logo, or both. On the copyright side, it's common for serious developers to register their game for copyright. In the U.S., you just do that by submitting the game and filling out the forms, and that covers the game and the code, underlying code. I am aware of some companies, and Epic has done it some in the past before me, submitting copyright applications to cover like a particular character or a weapon or a vehicle or something. I don't see that as common, and I think the times when that's necessary is pretty limited, almost never. So in my experience,
Mhm.
so and it would be a lot more expensive to do a lot of them. But just doing a U.S. copyright application for your game is not expensive. So that's pretty easy, and I think developers ought to do that.
All right. Someone was wondering if they commission something as an example to create like a 3D model, and it turns out the model was actually stolen from someone else, and it was not actually the work of the guy that he paid money to. What is that person's legal position then?
So party A hires party B to do art for them.
Yeah. Okay.
Party B steals that art
Mhm.
and says to party A, "Here, I did this for you, like you said, pay me."
Yeah.
Um, well, and then party A puts that stolen asset in their game and then gets trouble.
Mhm.
So party A is um, subject to liability for having content in their game they don't have the right to put. Now, you would like to see a contract between A and B that says, you're going to make this art for me, and it's going to be original. In fact, you promised to me that it is original. And then if you break that promise, you're going to protect me. So then, if you have that contract, to the extent that party A had that liability, party A could say to turn to B and say, "You got to stand and you got to protect me from this." That gets complicated when party B doesn't have any money.
Yeah.
So then it kind of then you get into areas of just trust, right? You're sort of looking for contractor work for hire artists that you trust, and I imagine that can be difficult.
Right. Let's see. So they're talking about in the event of a sports game, who pays to have the products of brands like Adidas or Nike available in the game? Is that developer licensing it? Is it the manufacturer as advertising or sponsorship, or it just sort of depends on the deal that they strike?
Right. I think it's the latter. Certainly, I wouldn't put Adidas or Nike in a game without permission.
Mm-hmm.
I would not trust on them viewing that as advertising.
Right.
I am confident that there have been games with product placement, paid product placement, meaning like the other company pays to have it in the game. And I'm confident that people have paid companies like Nike to include their trademarks in the game. So I think it varies. But I wouldn't want to get someone's hopes up that they, like Nike's going to pay them to put the check mark in the game.
Let's see. Um, so in general, they're clarifying that you don't want to use a brand without permission to use it.
Yeah.
It's best to always be in
Yep.
touch with someone. And they were mentioning they mentioned Ghost Recon and how they have Oakley sunglasses, and they assume that there's probably a deal there that
There's probably a deal
it's
there.
okay for them to
Yeah.
do it.
And you think about like there must be a deal, because why would Ubisoft care about what brand of sunglasses they are, right?
Oh.
Like it doesn't.
Who knows?
I mean, they care about realism,
Right.
but I imagine not to that degree.
Yeah.
Right. Like they're not gonna like say like we use Hanes undershirts for our soldiers. Like it just doesn't
Right.
it doesn't help that much.
No, not at all. Let's see. They were wondering, how do you normally go about approaching a company like that, like as a developer? Do you just sort of
So
reach
we
out to
haven't.
their marketing and
Yeah,
hope for the best, or
we haven't had those kind of games
Yeah.
at Epic. So like, there's no product placement in Gears of War.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think you'd have to. It would be difficult, I assume, if you're an indie developer and you wanted to reach out to Adidas. They don't have like a number to call up their head of like brand licensing.
Yeah.
So you just have to try and find some public
A
inquiry
telltale,
on the
yeah.
website.
All right. They're wondering, are there ways, or what are the best ways to search for brands that have exclusive deals?
Yeah, I saw
and
that
doing
question.
that kind of research.
There's not going to be.
You just kind of have to.
Yeah, there's not a database of.
Well, right.
of
deals and things,
IP
but
brand licensing deals.
it's just a
It's not.
figured out, contact people, and hope for the best. They're wondering about properties made specifically for the government, and are those open to public use? Is it dependent on?
So, do you think that means like this is a vehicle that's only sold to the government?
Like maybe it's maybe a military vehicle.
Yeah. So I care less. I'm less particular in that instance. So if there's like a weapon or a vehicle that's only sold to, let's say, the U.S. Army, that doesn't mean I want an exact replica of it with the name of the manufacturer, but I care less about a large number of stylistic or design changes. Like I'm okay with something that's closer to replica than evocative in that instance.
Okay.
Because I think that the risk is lower because this isn't a product that's available to the public.
They're not competing for the market.
That's right. So I think that means that the owner of the IP is less likely to be upset about use of it in that context.
Yep. And this goes back. We were talking a little bit about public domain. So they're like, why does Disney's intellectual property? Why can they still go after all of those things, even after they're 80 years old? And is it because they can they've renewed it, or is it?
Yeah. Well,
they just have the power to do so.
I'm sorry to break anyone's illusions about how politics work, but Disney spent a lot of money in the 70s to make sure that they didn't, through lobbying, to make sure that they didn't lose IP protection of their super valuable assets. So they're the reason why you could have up to the reason why the 1923 date exists. Like, why is it that date? I haven't looked at it in a while, but it's probably like when Mickey Mouse was created, and they're the reason why they have an up to 95-year life. And there's a lot of controversy about that because, as implied in that question, the point of IP is to encourage investment in the creation of new technology and content by giving the creator of that new content or technology rights to enjoy the benefit of their creation. But when those rights extend well beyond the productive life of that
individual
creator, then it gets further and further away from the point, like the original purpose of IP protection.
Gotcha. All right.
That said, ask me again when I've been Epic's lawyer for 70 years.
So they were wondering, what exactly is foreign patent pending, or is the foreign patent pending declaration, and how or why can that protect a product patented in the USA when a company declares that in the physical boxes that they...
Yeah, patent pending doesn't mean a lot. Patent pending means they've applied for a patent, and that takes a long time, usually like years. They mentioned foreign. I can't speak to foreign patents basically, but I assume for this purpose it's the same. Although the notation, if the notation said foreign patent pending, that sounds shady. But in any event, patent pending just means, hey everybody, don't copy our stuff because we're going to have a patent on it later and we might be able to go after you if you do. I just view it as a warning. Like they are claiming to be serious about protecting. And they might be.
If they get
but it's very easy to put patent pending on a thing.
Right.
Like it doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah, I mean, and you can totally put it there even if you haven't applied.
I think so, yeah.
Like I'm still waiting. I haven't filled out the application yet.
I'm thinking about it though. It's pending. It's I'm working on articulating it.
I don't know. They were asking specifically why concept artists can keep copyright of the art they produce, while like programmers modelers, voice actors, animators often do not. Have you found that's the case for one?
Well,
And
I
two,
think
if
that's a
true,
Europe-specific question.
is it? Okay.
Yeah. So in the U.S., it just depends on the contract, and the contract can be like the work for hire contract or the employment agreement between the game company and
Mm-hmm.
the artist. Um, in Europe, they have certain, they call them moral rights, where artists have some arguably, or depending on the country, inalienable fundamental rights about the art. Um, from a practical perspective, this doesn't cause trouble in Europe, even in Europe. Um, but I'm not a European lawyer, so I can't give advice about
Understand.
that.
Um,
And I can't give advice at all because I'm not your lawyer, and this is not legal advice.
These are just suggestions.
That's right.
Not even. We're just talking.
General discussion.
Yep. They're wondering, what about unique mechanics of part of a game? So, for instance, the glue gun in Prey. What part of a mechanic sticking to a wall for climbing as well and disabling enemies can just be used without giving credit to the original idea? Or
Well,
or can you really do
so I can't speak
mechanics?
to, I don't know that gun. So certainly a gun that's original to the game. So like the Lancer from Gears of War,
Mhm.
you know, the chainsaw gun thing. That was, to my knowledge, new and original to Gears of War. So the idea of a gun with a blade on it isn't original,
No.
right? Obviously, that's existed for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But the specific implementation or expression of the idea of the chainsaw gun in Gears of War is absolutely protectable. So another game couldn't duplicate that without permission. But Epic, or Microsoft, who now owns Gears of War, certainly couldn't go after another company just because they have a gun with a moving blade on it.
Right.
As for game mechanics, that's a vague term.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly the game industry is built on inspiration from other games, right? So like presumably the creators of Sonic were familiar with Mario, and I'm assuming that Mario wasn't the first platformer. But you know, the people. So is it a game mechanic to have like a little character running across
Yeah.
and jumping?
Like a platformer.
You could argue that's a mechanic, but it gets, in the game context for copyright, it gets harder to have protection the more vague you get. So if you say like, here's this character, this is the art for the character, you can't put the art for this character in your game. That's pretty straightforward.
Right.
We wrote this music for this game, you can't take that and put it in your game. But you say like, we have a King of the Hill mode, and we're the first person to do that, and now you can't have a multiplayer mode that looks like that. I don't think that has any traction.
Any grounds?
Yeah.
What about like the portal gun from Portal? Because that's a specifically made gun, but also the mechanic is intrinsic.
It's a good question. It is fairly iconic for the game.
So real quick, I don't know if they can hear Daniel.
Oh.
He was asking about the portal gun, and so it's a specifically designed gun, and then from that gun stems a mechanic that you use to go throughout the game.
Yeah. It's that gun is iconic for the game beyond just the beyond the normal. Like, it's iconic for those games more than the Lancer was for the Epic games. I think that would have a heightened level of protection. That said, Valve is not a really aggressive company in that regard, so I imagine it would need to be like very similar for them to go after them. but it would certainly be discourteous to try and duplicate it because it is very original and
Mhm.
and like I said, iconic of that. It would feel if you did something just like it, it would feel like you were taking the very core mechanic of their game.
Someone was wondering about adapting from games that you see, like board games. So a lot of times you get these Scrabble to like Words with Friends and
Yeah.
things like that. How different, or can they be quite similar? Well, obviously they can
it
be,
varies.
but
So you certainly, I would heavily advise against saying like, all right, I'm going to make a Monopoly video game
right.
based on the board game, but it's different because it's a game. No, you can't do that. But certainly you could make a video game that was inspired by the game Monopoly, but you would want to make it different,
Modify it.
right? And Scrabble and Words with Friends. I know Scrabble. Actually, I never played Words with Friends, but I assume it has similar but different mechanics. There are variances.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I
Um,
think they changed the values of
like the way
the
scoring works.
pieces.
Um,
The board's different.
Yeah.
The placement.
The layout of the board and like the piece.
Bonuses and stuff.
But-
Those are all different.
well, that's a pretty important part of what Scrabble is.
It's true.
But you couldn't. But whoever Mattel, I don't know, whoever owns Scrabble, they couldn't say you can't make another game that involves making words out of letters that you get randomly.
Right.
They can't own that.
And then, all right. Going back to laws. So they were wondering whose country's laws do they follow? So if you're in the U.S., you are generally abide by U.S. copyright law. But if your game is released internationally, how do you mind all the different
Yeah.
locations and laws surrounding that?
It's tough. Right. So if you're a U.S.-based developer, certainly your activities are governed by U.S. law. But if you are releasing your game in Europe, you can't say like, "Oh, European law doesn't apply to me because I'm an American developer." European law does apply to you, at least to the extent that you're releasing your game in Europe, and you've got a European player base, and you're collecting personal data from those individuals. You're subject to European data privacy laws. The same would be true for so trademark law is fairly universal, but there are local variances. So you could certainly be sued in Spain for a Spanish registered trademark that is the same or confusingly similar to something in your game which is released in Spain.
All right.
So it's a cost of doing business to be subject to the laws of the countries in which you are doing business. That said, usually you have to have either, assuming you don't have something controversial, usually you have to have a lot of business in a particular country before it becomes
It really
something you
affects
really have to pay close attention to.
All right. Let's see. So there was some question about Easter eggs.
Uh-huh.
And, folks love putting Easter eggs in their games, but is it the same, like, theoretically, you still need permission to have those things in there?
Yes. So I think it reduces the risk profile to have a thing that's difficult to find, right? It's like not part of the main game.
Right.
That said, I mentioned like the finder of fact before in juries. I would not be too confident that juries would be able to really understand the concept of an Easter egg, right? So I think for people that aren't gamers, I think if the opposing counsel is saying, look, this thing's in the game, here's a picture of it,
Yeah.
this is clearly in their game, it's clearly our thing, I don't know that a jury's going to say, yeah, but it's hard to find. They might. I do think it makes the risk lower, but ultimately I don't think it changes the calculus.
Theoretically, you should still,
Yes.
or you should still ask.
Yeah. I also note on the concept of Easter eggs for any viewers who do contract work for hire stuff, it's pretty common in work for hire contracts or like a publishing deal, like if you've got Ubisoft or Microsoft publishing your game, it's common for some sort of provision that prevents you from having Easter eggs that the publisher or the developer isn't aware of. Right? So usually there's something that requires the people creating the game to be upfront about hidden content. It's because people don't want to get burned by hot coffee. That's a Grand Theft Auto reference. There's that that like naked sex thing in Grand Theft Auto 3 that became controversial, but it was like really hard to get to, or maybe it wasn't even in the official game at all.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't stop there from being congressional hearings about it.
Right. So jumping into a few of the chat questions, they're wondering if they if they buy assets for a game from Marketplace, and then these assets end up being stolen, can the person that actually owns those assets come after those people that have purchased it, or would it go to the seller? We touched on it a little bit earlier, but
yes, I think legally speaking, the owner of the asset or the IP could go after anybody who was using it without permission. Now, practically speaking, it would make a lot more sense for them to go to Epic because they can talk to one party instead of, I don't know, however many people are using that thing. But yes, ultimately, you can go after anybody that's using your stuff without permission, unfortunately. Oh, well, I say unfortunately.
Yeah, there's pros and
yeah, if you're in, it's unfortunate if you're in this situation.
Yeah. There have been a few questions around using ideas or assets from like dead franchises or previous games that are no longer active.
Right.
And
yeah, I would not want to do that.
I would imagine they still own.
I do get questions about that sometimes because people might say, well, you know, I've been at Epic's counsel for a long time. I've gotten tons of requests over the years. Hey, you guys aren't doing Jazz Jackrabbit. I want to do a new Jazz Jackrabbit game. We're going to do Jazz Jackrabbit 3. And, you know, in their mind, they're like, well, you're not doing it, so we can do it. But that doesn't mean that the IP doesn't still have value to Epic. And well, a couple months ago, we just released those games on GOG.
Mm-hmm.
It would be very dangerous to assume that you could take some old like Namco or Atari game and make a new version of it just because they haven't made a game in that IP for 10, 15 years.
Okay. They're wondering, do you have any suggestions for, you know, because a lot of these questions result in it varies or it depends. Yeah. Are there means of looking up this kind of information other than just go talk to a lawyer?
Well,
or what's the best way for them to navigate some of these spaces?
I have sympathy for that for sure because for an indie developer, hiring counsel can be quite expensive. You know, lawyers are just a bunch of greedy, no-good bastards who want nothing more than to take away your hard-earned money. So I do sympathize.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're talking, there aren't clear answers. If we're saying like how close is too close,
right?
that only gets answered until it goes through litigation, which nobody wants.
Right.
So there's no database online that says this is how close you can be to a Glock.
Right.
So you have this. It's a judgment call. And when I look at these questions, I'm making a judgment call. Now, it's informed by years of making similar judgment calls and being aware of trends or various information in the industry, but it's still a judgment call. And so if you don't want to use counsel, then the safest advice is to be conservative.
100%. Or as
or just
original as
lean
possible.
conservative
Yeah.
in terms of like, is this too close? I'm worried about this, but I don't want to hire a lawyer. Well, maybe the safer answer is don't do it.
Okay. So a lot of these have been one direction. They're curious. So if someone uses assets they created and then made slight modifications and then claimed the work was only used as a base, what courses do they have there, or can they go after that person?
Yes, in theory. I mean, that's fact specific, but
Right.
copyright protections include the right to make derivative works.
Mm-hmm.
So you, as a copyright owner, can prevent other parties from making derivative works. So I couldn't take, so let's say I took a Harry Potter book and changed the name of Harry and Hermione and Ron and the other characters, and I changed the name of Hogwarts, and then I started changing the story, and then eventually I got to a book that was 50% different. That's still no good.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Right.
I'm not allowed to use the Harry Potter book in that way. I don't have a right to do that. So yeah, if somebody bought your art and then made changes to it and then sold it, they don't have a right to do that.
Okay.
Unless you gave it to them.
Right. So they're wondering, what do you actually need to obtain to use something like with permission? Is that just something in writing from the person from the creator, or?
In the most formal sense, that's in the form of a license, meaning a contract that says license at the top and has words in it that create a legally binding license between the two parties. But depending on what it is, and the importance of it, and the interest in avoiding doing another contract, I might be cool with a clear email or something. So somebody says, yeah, totally, no problem putting that in your game. Good luck. That's pretty safe. So if somebody sued you afterwards and you save that email, and you would definitely want to save it, it would be really hard for them to go after you if they had said that. Because you could show the court, like, they said they really wanted me to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you said, hey, I want to use this thing in my game, and they said, yeah, that's probably okay, we should talk about it, that's not permission.
All right. Let's see. Their example, it's a little more specific. So Norway doesn't have fair use in the same way the U.S. has. And so if they published a game, for example, on Steam with music that's considered fair use, can they still get sued by a third party because they don't live in the U.S.?
That sounds like a Norway law question.
It's a very specific.
That I definitely can't answer.
Let's see. Jumping back to military weapons, what if they were never manufactured? So if they find prototypes or proposals, are those generally?
I mean, that sounds fairly safe, particularly if it was like World War II or something, right? Something old. If it was something like a prototype, I don't know, they probably wouldn't have access to it. But if it was a prototype for the second U.S.-Iraq war or Afghanistan, that sounds riskier. Okay. But like some German rocket that was never used in World War II because they never got around to manufacturing, or some like new kind of Ironside in the U.S. Civil War, that seems fine.
Let's see. how can they secure themselves as like a private person? I think this is going to go back to contracts. If they share their project in a team, so that that assets aren't stolen from them. It's just a matter of setting that
Yeah,
up and the expectations in your contract of who's the owner of those.
I think I definitely understand why indie developers don't want to have good contracts between their partners, meaning like employees or team members or contractors. It's a pain to do it, and they're like your buddies, and everything's cool. But a game can take multiple years. People can have a falling out. I've definitely seen really messy situations for indie devs where there was like two people really working on it all the time, and then they had a falling out, and both of them wanted to kind of continue a version of the game. There's no contract between them to say who owns what. It just gets really messy. It's far preferable to have something that's clear and in writing, that says who owns the game, who owns the IP. If it's a contractor, that they're assigning their rights to you in the art that they make, and what happens if the team member leaves, who owns what's been created up to that point.
All right. Let's see. So they were wondering at what time is something to consider to like copy an idea. So they were talking about how like Dota, LOL, and all those are very much the same style. So at that point, they're all very similar, but it goes back to it's just a gameplay style instead.
Right. To say MOBA,
Like,
right? A MOBA
as
is a
opposed
game
to
with lanes,
platformer.
with heroes, with unique abilities, and minions and that kind of stuff. These are ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But if you use the same character as a League character, or you duplicated the League item shop, that would be a problem.
Okay.
But certainly, League or Valve doesn't own the idea of a MOBA.
Right. They're wondering if an art style can be protected. For example, Borderlands' overall cell shading style. Obviously, I don't think they can do cell shading in general.
That's right.
But their art style is very distinct and unique.
It is. And I think they don't like it being called cell shading, if I recall. But that's a good question. I think they would have challenges.
Yeah.
I think they would have challenges. So it would certainly, when courts, in the few instances that courts have considered similarities between two games, like somebody says this game ripped me off, they do look certainly at the visuals, the way that the two games look.
Mm-hmm.
So it could lean heavily, something that consideration point heavily, but if that was the similarity, right? Like if it was an RTS, but it just looked like that, I think they would be hard pressed.
Okay. They were wondering if going back sort of on Easter eggs where there was some concern. They were wondering if you could not claim that as an exception of satirical or humorous content and sort of have some protections under that.
So,
or I guess it depends on how it's handled in the game.
Yeah. So satire relates to fair use,
Mm-hmm.
And it's a gray area as well. But typically, it gets quite hard to claim any kind of fair use when you've got a clearly commercial product. So for Weird Al or Mad Magazine, the whole thing is satire.
Right.
Like that's what the product is.
Yeah.
But an epic, a video game isn't satire usually, right?
Mm-hmm.
It may contain humor, and it may have an element of satire, but to say here's this one satirical thing, but the rest of the game is quite serious,
Mm-hmm.
it would be hard to claim fair use protection for that reason.
Okay. All right. Let's see. I think we're going to call it here.
Okay.
We've gone a little over our time. Obviously, feel free to add more questions to the forum. If you don't mind me poking and prodding you for a few more answers now and again on the forums.
We'll see.
Well, maybe. But thank you all for being so active. I know this was it's a really important topic, and we're going to try and help keep you informed as far as these kinds of things in the future and help support you there as we can. I'm going to drop a survey link in the chat, so always let us know how you're doing, what you'd like to see on future live streams.
It's not like grading your professor where they grade my performance.
Yeah,
that doesn't
they
sound good. I don't want that survey.
It's just like ratemyprofessor.com. It's like the same thing. No.
That was also not. I was not told about that in advance either.
And then, as always, please submit your projects to the NVIDIA Edge program. Make sure to tag us and NVIDIA, or Unreal Engine and NVIDIA in it. We're always looking for new and exciting things to send you or reasons to send you a 1080 Ti and get you some swanky hardware. Do keep an eye out. The Global Game Jam is coming up January 26th through 28th. We always encourage you to be a part of that. A lot of amazing games going on, game development going on all around the world. And once again, thank you for taking the time.
You're quite
It's
welcome.
a lot of questions and a lot of information that's really valuable to our developers and our community.
Wow.
So
Hopefully it's helpful.
I think it is very helpful. So thank you.
Sure.
And we will see you all next week. Thank you
Bye.
so much for joining us.